We can move chairs. We can move more chairs up to the front as well. So we can move more chairs. It's okay. Yeah, you can move them. It's all right. Who? Oh, she's making her way in, I'm sure. There's still about 25 people who haven't shown up yet. I sent Jim out. It's Jim. We will set more up as we should be able to pretty much fill. Friends, there's still a lot of chairs that are empty. We can set more up as needed. We'd like to get started. I tell you, the view from this side is fabulous. See so many new faces and people we don't see so often from all over the greater Tampa area. It's just wonderful. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Pinellas County Baha'i community. Some of you know that every first Friday of the month, we have different programs here, usually preceded by a dinner like this evening. It's not always fried chicken. Sometimes it's pizza. We have food for the soul and food for the body. So anyway, I know that you will want to continue with some fellowship after the program, but we have such an amazing program tonight. I have had the great blessing and privilege of knowing Tim and Ann Perry probably since 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. Our paths have crossed at a number of wonderful occasions. And they have a very rich background of work in the arts. Tim is a professional cinematographer and director, producer, and Ann is involved in many different aspects of the arts and particularly loves drama and putting on productions. Some of you will remember that when we had the 100th anniversary of Abdu'l-Baha's visit to North America in 1912, they did a wonderful movie called Luminous Journey. It was just fabulous. And I know many of us had the opportunity to watch it. It's still available. So hopefully you'll want to watch it again after tonight. But they always had this second yearning in their heart to tell the story of his visit to Europe, to England, and particularly to France. He also went to Hungary, Germany, Austria, and so forth. They will only be briefly mentioned. Abdu'l-Baha spent more time in France than any other place during his time in the West between 1911 and 1913. And in the process of doing these two films, Ann and Tim have truly become experts on the master's visit to the West. So they have lots of interesting stories and information. Now, Abdu'l-Baha, as you know, was the eldest son of Baha'u'llah and his ordained successor. So he was the head of the faith from the passing of his father in 1892 until his own passing in 1921. We just a year ago commemorated his passing. That's how close in time we are to have that centenary. He has a unique role in religious history. And this may sound, for those of you who are hearing it for the first time, as a really outlandish claim. But he was a perfect human being. This period of history is so important that not only did God send us two messengers, because we are in so much trouble and life is so complex in this day, but he sent us one person who is not a messenger of God, but understands their teachings completely and perfectly lives them. So he is our example. He is the one person we can stop and say, how would Abdu'l-Baha do that? And that would be a good question to ask, because he had so many experiences in his life. He was most of his life a prisoner in jails for conscience, not for doing bad deeds. So Abdu'l-Baha is a very unique person. How many people here in this room met people who met Abdu'l-Baha? I mean, this is how close in time we are, that I remember stories from people who met him that they told me personally. So this is a very, very special person. And we have an increasing amount of information as more and more scholars go into archives and newspaper archives and pull out letters and other things, diaries. So all of that has been put to good use by Tim and Ann, who will talk to you more after this. I'm going to briefly introduce them in a second, but I also want to tell you that Abdu'l-Baha's time in France doesn't easily follow a chronology, which is the easiest form of storytelling. Instead, the easiest way to talk about those months in France is to talk about each of the topics he addressed. So the film sort of has sections where it talks about his encounters with children and about world peace and about racism and prejudice and so forth. So that's how it will be organized as you watch this amazing film. So without further ado, I introduce to you Ann and Tim Perry, who are here from Dallas, Texas.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was a beautiful introduction, and I'm sure you're very eager to see the film. And we're just so excited to be here. And what a special audience you are, coming from different places and different backgrounds, ages. And we're just delighted to be back here. We were here in 2013 or 12 when Luminous Journey first came out. So this is such a joy to be back, and we're enjoying Kathy and Gary's hospitality, and it just lined up with the film screening. You want to say anything?
Again, I repeat what Ann says. It's wonderful to be here, and we hope to get to talk with all of you after the film, and we'll answer some questions. And there are some seats up front still for anyone who's just coming in. We're going to ask that at the end of the film that we leave the lights down for the entire credit sequence, so you can see the people that were involved in bringing this film to the screen. The film is available on YouTube now, and along with Luminous Journey, and we can talk more about that. We ask that you silence your cell phones, and we hope the film is not so boring that you want to play some video games or something, but if you do, please step out. So I think that's about it.
Before we start the film, just to get us in a very proper mood. So please. Thank you.
O thou kind Lord, these are thy servants who have gathered in this meeting, have turned unto thy kingdom, and are in need of thy bestowal and blessings. O thou God, manifest and make evident the signs of thy oneness, which have deposited in all the realities of life. Reveal and unfold the virtues which thou hast made latent and concealed in these human realities. O God, we are as plants, and thy bounty is as the rain, refreshing cause these plants to grow through thy bestowal. We are thy servants. Free us from the fetters of material existence. We are ignorant, make us wise. We are dead, make us alive. We are material, endow us with thy spirit. We are deprived, make us in the intimates of thy mysteries. We are needy, enrich and bless us from thy boundless treasury. O God, resuscitate us, give us sight, give us hearing, familiarize us with thy mysteries of life, so that the secrets of thy kingdom may become revealed to us in this world of existence, and we may confess thy oneness. Every bestowal emanates from thee, Every benediction is thine. Thou art mighty, thou art powerful, thou art the giver, and thou art the ever bounteous.
On the eve of the First World War, and during a fascinating period in European history, the city of Paris stood as a magnet for artists, inventors, scientists, and thinkers. The undisputed art capital of the world had a population of more than 2 million, buzzing with automobiles, taxis, buses, streetcars, and a first-class metro. Innovations in commerce, technology, arts, and sciences led to new advancements. The Eiffel Tower had been built. The first public motion pictures screened, and artistic and social movements initiated. Into this environment, a remarkable man traveled from Palestine to Egypt and countries in the West. His time away lasted 3 years and 4 months. During that time, he traveled to 7 countries in Europe, the United States and Canada, and back to Egypt. In the West, he arrived first in France.
Le tourbillon de la Belle Époque, Abdu'l-Baha incarne une beauté qui attire les gens en quête d'un renouveau spirituel.
Abdu'l-Baha had a magnetism. There was a charisma just in the name Abdu'l-Baha.
Son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Baha was born in Persia and given the name Abbas. Later, he came to be known as Abdu'l-Baha, which means servant of glory. His father, designating him as his own successor, interpreter, and the center of his covenant, also referred to Abdu'l-Baha as the Master, a term adopted by many of his followers. Exiled in his youth and imprisoned for 40 years, he was released after a prolonged confinement in Akka, and with great resolve, at age 67, set out on a journey to promote peace, the unity of peoples and nations, equality, and freedom from prejudice.
Abdu'l-Baha, il souffle une vision nouvelle et révolutionnaire du monde et de la religion.
Abdu'l-Baha's grandson, Shoghi Effendi, noted, "During these travels, Abdu'l-Baha displayed a vitality, a courage, a single-mindedness, a consecration to the task he had set himself to achieve that excited the wonder and admiration of those who had the privilege of observing at close hand his daily acts."
On his travels, he proclaimed the extraordinary teachings of his father and his father's forerunner, the Ba, through words and action. Paris was the first major city of his sojourn.
Donc Paris occupe une place très importante pour non seulement la France, mais aussi pour les Bahá'ís du monde. Par exemple, Baha'u'llah a envoyé 2 fois son message divin à Napoléon III, où la foi, dès le départ, a été mentionnée dans la presse française, essentiellement quand il y avait la persécution des croyants et des fidèles du Bab. Mais tout ceci, c'était avant 1900.
Even before he came to France, Abdu'l-Baha influenced and was in touch with early Baha'is there.
À partir de 1900, la première communauté Baha'i a été formée à Paris grâce à tous les soins de Abdu'l-Baha et ses directives. J'ai l'impression que Abdu'l-Baha soignait et de très près cette communauté naissante, dont certains membres éminents comme Hippolyte Dreyfus, comme Laura Clifford Barney, ou Edith Sanderson, ou Monsieur et Madame Scott, qui a servi énormément la foi en France. Abdu'l-Baha, comme je viens de dire, envoyait toujours ses lettres à cette communauté naissante, qui leur parlait de l'avenir de Paris, de l'avenir de la France.
May Bowles had moved to Paris in 1894 with her mother and brother, who attended the École des Beaux-Arts. In 1898, Phoebe Hearst came through Paris en route to the Holy Land to meet Abdu'l-Baha and invited May on the pilgrimage. Their short stay proved transformational.
Those were the most memorable days of my life. The Master I will not attempt to describe. My greatest blessing in this world is that I have been privileged to be in his presence. He is the most wonderful being I have ever met or ever expect to meet in this world. The spiritual atmosphere which surrounds him and most powerfully affects all those blessed by being near him is indescribable.
Of that first meeting, I can remember neither joy nor pain nor anything that I can name. Carried suddenly to too great a height, my soul had come in contact with a divine spirit. And this force, so pure, so holy, so mighty, had overwhelmed me. He spoke to each one of us in turn, of ourselves and our lives and those whom we loved. And although his words were so few and so simple, they breathed the spirit of life to our souls.
Transformed by the trip and confirmed as a Baha'i, May returned to Paris and began teaching her new faith. Thus, the French capital was home to Europe's first community of Baha'is, many of them North Americans residing in the city as artists or students of the arts. Among those drawn to Abdu'l-Baha through May's teaching was the scholar, lawyer, and orator Hippolyte Dreyfus, who became the first French Baha'i and among the first Westerners of Jewish origins to embrace the faith. He visited Abdu'l-Baha in the Holy Land in 1903 and later described him in these words.
A captivating charm with an eloquence which made his conversation sought after even by his adversaries. His unique intelligence is capable of seizing all the aspects of a question and without hesitation seeing its solution. His heart attracts the disinterested of life who feel instinctively drawn towards him.
Laura Clifford Barney and her sister Natalie were educated in France. Accompanied by their mother, Alice Pike Barney. Later, Laura studied dramatic arts and sculpture in Paris. During her first trip to the Holy Land, she recalled,
When the Master appeared, I was overwhelmed, for such an atmosphere of perfect majesty and humility surrounded his whole being. He swept into the room and, after a most beautiful welcome, bade us be seated. Then the flood of his words became as living water. I could not understand the language, but the spirit was so strong that we felt as though we knew the words, even before they were given in translation. At first we remained stunned, but soon to my great surprise I began to weep. Not tears of sadness, tears of hope and deep gratitude.
On her various trips to the Holy Land, Laura asked questions of Abdu'l-Baha and recorded the answers. In 1904, Laura and Hippolyte traveled to Persia at the request of Abdu'l-Baha, and in 1911, they married and settled in Paris, adopting the name Dreyfus Barney. Other early Baha'is in Paris were Thomas Breakwell, the first English Baha'i, who died of tuberculosis soon after learning of the faith. Edith McKay, who became the first Baha'i in Switzerland, and two Americans, Edith Sanderson, who hosted Abdu'l-Baha, and Sidney Sprague, an author, lecturer, and composer studying at the Sorbonne. The group also included Edwin Scott, an American Impressionist painter, Mountfort Mills, an American international lawyer, Bertha Herbert Holly and Horace Holly, who managed the progressive Ashnur Gallery in Paris from 1912 to 1914, and Mary Alice Buckton and Wellesley Tudor Pole, British Baha'is.
Abdu'l-Baha seemed to me to focus in a truly divine manner the spiritual ideal of the coming age. One has no doubt that this movement will vitally affect the religious and social evolution of the whole world.
Other Baha'is who spent time in Paris included Lua Getzinger, an outstanding American teacher of the faith, Sarah Farmer, founder of the Greenacre Conferences, Lady Sarah Louisa Blomfield, Abdu'l-Baha's hostess in London, Ethel Jenner Rosenberg, an English painter of portrait miniatures, American artist Julia Thompson, Canadian artists Marion Jack and Percy Franklin Woodcock, and Beatrice Irwin, an American stage lighting engineer.
Alors, lorsqu'ils entendent que Abdu'l-Baha a accepté leurs invitations pour venir les visiter à Paris, ils étaient au comble de joie.
His first visit to France began at the port of Marseille. He was greeted by Hippolyte Dreyfus, who, after a stay of several days in Marseille, accompanied him to Geneva, where he spent one night at the Hôtel de la Paix, a very large, prestigious hotel located on the shore of Lake Geneva, with Mont Blanc visible in the distance. From there, they took a ferry across Lake Geneva to Thonon-les-Bains, where Laura Dreyfus Barney, Juliet Thompson, and others joined the group. In Thonon-les-Bains, a small resort known for its mineral waters and refreshing air, Abdu'l-Baha stayed at the Grand Hôtel du Parc. There, he wrote of the beauty of the area to both his wife and his sister.
The beauty of the scenery, the purity of the water, the charm of the horizon, the softness of the breeze, and the lushness of the mountain have combined to produce an extraordinary sight. It is hoped that through the favors of the ancient beauty, this broken-winged gnat will be so strengthened in servitude to the threshold of the desired one as to extend new wings.
Abdu'l-Baha went on an excursion in the mountains to visit the spectacular gorges of the Devil's Bridge.
His excitement over beauty is wonderful to watch and perfectly heartrending when you think of his long, long life in prison. He, our Lord, led us to the Devil's Bridge. I can see him now just ahead of us. The white robe, the black abba, the white turban, the beautiful sway of his walk among the trees. The fragrance of his divinity enveloped me, and I realized something of the moment's sacredness. Just in this way, the disciples of nearly 2,000 years ago must have sat with their Lord. The sunlight through the trees made their leaves translucent, but the Master's profile shone like a lighted alabaster lamp.
During the trip back, he remarked, "There was no one in the world who loved trees and water and the country so much as Baha'u'llah." Later in Colorado, he said, "May God have mercy on the tyrants who kept the Blessed Beauty in prison for 40 years. Such scenes were loved by him." All through his journey, Abdu'l-Baha met and changed those who came into his presence, sometimes expressing forgiveness for past deeds. At Thonon-les-Bains, Zilu Sultan, son of Nasser al-Din Shah, who had martyred the Bab and imprisoned Baha'u'llah, who had himself persecuted Baha'is in Iran, had fled to Geneva, now a fugitive. He happened to be visiting at the same hotel as Abdu'l-Baha. Hippolyte caught sight of him on the terrace, recognizing him from his time in Persia.
Zillah Sultan approached Hippolyte and immediately asked, "Who is that Persian nobleman?" "Abdu'l-Baha. Take me to him." In describing the scene later, Hippolyte said, "If you could have heard the wretch mumbling his miserable excuses." But Abdu'l-Baha took the prince in his arms. "All that is of the past," he answered. "Never think of it again. Send your 2 sons to see me. I want to meet your sons." They came, one at a time. Each spent a day with the Master. The first showed him great deference. The second, older and more sensitive, left the room weeping uncontrollably. "If only I could be born again," he said, "into any other family than mine." For not only had many Baha'is been martyred during his uncle's reign, and the life of Abdu'l-Baha threatened, but his grandfather had ordered the execution of the Bab. The young prince was born again, a Baha'i.
Abdu'l-Baha made an excursion across the lake to Vevey in Switzerland to meet Edith Sanderson and her mother at the Parc Hôtel Messer. Vevey was another famous resort, and the site of the Dreyfus summer home. Upon returning to Thonon-les-Bains, Horace Holly, his wife Bertha, and their daughter arrived from Italy to see him. Horace recalled,
I saw a stately old man, his white hair and beard shining in the sun. He displayed a beauty of stature, a harmony of attitude and dress I had never seen nor thought of in men. Without having ever visualized the master, I knew that this was he. My whole body underwent a shock. In every part of me, I stood aware of Abdu'l-Baha's presence. I realized that I had thus been drawn near to pure spirit and pure being.
Abdu'l-Baha also spent a few more days in Geneva at the Hôtel de la Paix. A stream of newspaper articles during Abdu'l-Baha's visits to France and Switzerland were published in various countries. The newspaper La Suisse made the following report.
On signale le passage en l'Hôtel de la Paix d'un haut personnage persan, Abbas Effendi, chef spirituel de la religion libérale, le bahaïsme, qui englobe plusieurs millions d'adeptes, de répartissants dans toute l'Asie. Abbas Effendi a reçu de nombreuses visites. C'est aussi, paraît-il, un distingué poète qui possède à merveille plusieurs langues asiatiques.
On September 4th, 1911, Abdu'l-Baha and his party left Geneva for London via train through Paris, taking a ferry across the Strait of Dover to connect with the London train arriving finally at Victoria Station.
He arrived, and who shall picture him? A silence overcame us as we looked at him. He seemed an incarnation of wisdom and compassion, of power and authority, of strength, and of a buoyant youthfulness which seemed to somehow defy the burden of his years. He came to us with hands outstretched. I am very much pleased with you all. Your love has drawn me. Day by day, friends brought offerings of flowers and fruit so that the table was laden with these beautiful tokens of love for Abdu'l-Baha. Cutting off bunches of grapes and giving them to various guests, he talked to us of the joy of freedom, of how grateful we should be for the privilege of dwelling in safety under just laws.
London newspapers carried stories of his arrival, and a series of meetings ensued at the homes of various Baha'is, sometimes attended by as many as 80 guests. Among the many who met with him were the Lord Mayor of London, prominent clergymen such as Archdeacon Wilberforce and the Reverend R.J. Campbell, the poet Ezra Pound, and women campaigning for the right to vote. On September 10th, Abdu'l-Baha gave his first public address in the Western world to an audience of around 2,000 at the City Temple. He also traveled to Bristol, where he spent a weekend, and Byfleet in Surrey, where he spoke to working women at the home of Alice Buckton. After spending a month in England, Abdu'l-Baha returned to Paris for his first extended visit, beginning on October 3rd, 1911. Paris was Europe's premier city. Foreigners from many places flocked to it. On his 3 visits to Paris, Abdu'l-Baha stayed a total of 5 months and 18 days, longer than in any other city. On the first evening, he stayed at the home of Hippolyte and Laura Dreyfus Barney at 15 Rue Reuze. Then moved to a nearby apartment they rented for his stay at 4 Avenue de Camoins.
It was charmingly furnished, sunny, spacious. Sheltered in this modern, comfortable Paris flat, he whom we revered, with a secretary, servitors, and a few close friends, sojourned for an unforgettable 9 weeks.
The building was new, built in 1910. Avenue de Camoins was a short, quiet cul-de-sac, starting at Rue Benjamin Franklin and ending in a flight of stairs going down to Boulevard Désert. This led directly into the Trocadero Gardens, where the master could often be seen walking, admiring the view of the park, the Seine, and the Eiffel Tower.
Quand Abdu'l-Baha était à Paris, donc, il avait l'habitude, puisqu'il est en 1911, donc il y avait les jardins du Trocadéro qui s'ouvraient tout près, donc il avait l'habitude de se promener dans le jardin du Trocadéro, et il disait qu'à chaque fois qu'il voyait des espaces verts, il pensait à son père qui pendant tellement longtemps, son père, bah alors là, qui pendant tellement longtemps ne pouvait pas voir ne serait-ce qu'un brin d'herbe, quoi. Donc voilà, donc on peut imaginer que quand Abdu'l-Baha se promenait dans les jardins du Trocadéro, il avait un sentiment particulier, il ressentait des choses particulières.
The apartment was the site of many of Abdu'l-Baha's meetings and talks with visitors. He expounded upon the principles of Baha'u'llah, and to each he gave a special lesson or insight.
In the morning, he would have private meetings with individuals one-on-one. And then about 11 o'clock, there would be a small public meeting. They were so intoxicated with the love of Abdu'l-Baha that they knew neither place nor time.
In France, most of his recorded talks were conversations held with individuals or small groups of people.
When Abdu'l-Baha was in France, he gave very few talks, public talks, to the Esperantists, the Theosophists, to churches. Most of his talks were private talks, small groups, with politicians and ambassadors.
Heureusement, les 51 causeries publiques de Abdu'l-Baha données à Paris sont publiées par Lady Sarah Louisa Blanfield et ses 2 filles, Rose Eleanor Cecilia et Marie-Esther, et une amie de leur famille, Miss Béatrice Platt, en 1912 à Londres.
In the book Paris Talks, Abdu'l-Baha addresses important themes that are relevant today, offering inspiration and encouragement.
Strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble. Enrich the poor, raise the fallen, comfort the sorrowful, bring healing to the sick, reassure the fearful, rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter the destitute.
The words of Abdu'l-Baha can be put onto paper, But how describe the smile, the earnest pleading, the loving kindness, the radiant vitality, and the awe-inspiring authority of his spoken words? The vibrations of his voice seem to penetrate to the very core of being.
In Paris, Abdu'l-Baha met people from all walks of life and various nationalities, artists, writers, politicians, and journalists.
Hommes et femmes de toutes couches sociales et de toutes professions ont eu le privilège d'être inspirés et instruits par cette âme inestimable et apprendre de lui et de son exemple la valeur d'une vie au service de l'humanité pour l'avènement d'un monde meilleur.
According to Lady Blomfield, the many guests included
Theosophists, agnostics, materialists, spiritualists, Christian scientists, social reformers, Hindus, Sufis, Muslims, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and workers in various humanitarian societies who are striving to reduce the miseries of the poor. These received special sympathy and blessing.
In this room today are members of many races meeting in friendship and harmony. Let this gathering be a foreshadowing of what will take place in this world. When every child of God realizes that they are leaves of one tree, flowers in one garden, drops in one ocean, and sons and daughters of one Father, whose name is love.
Many people sought Abdu'l-Baha while he was in France, some traveling a great distance to be with him. Mary Hanford Ford, an American lecturer, author, and leader in the women's suffrage movement, visited Abdu'l-Baha in Paris.
At his apartment, everyone was admitted, no matter to what nationality he belonged, no matter how shabby were his clothes. Abdu'l-Baha is like a great magnet, drawing together the noblest forces of nations and individuals. The effect of this electric presence was that of clear and prodigious thinking, which swept away all trivialities.
Il éclaire par sa profonde sagesse et sa puissance bienveillance la vie de ceux qui pouvaient croiser son chemin.
Abdu'l-Baha related to people without seeing them physically. He would see their inner being, and you relate to that. So it didn't matter to him what country they're from, what language they spoke, what profession they were, how they dressed.
Abdu'l-Baha donne sa première conférence publique à la salle de l'Athénée de Saint-Germain à Paris le 9 novembre 1911 comme invité de l'Alliance spiritualiste.
Here he expressed delight in the group and its focus on spirituality, and explained the Baha'i revelation, emphasizing the capacity of humanity to manifest the spirit.
By the power of the Holy Spirit, man is able to perceive the divine reality of things. All great works of art and science are witnesses to this power of the Spirit. Your souls are as waves on the sea of the Spirit. Although each individual is a distinct wave, the ocean is one. We must not consider the separate waves alone, but the entire sea. Strive to serve the cause of unity and true equality, so that the light of the Spirit shall be apparent in all our deeds.
été rencontrer le pasteur Weiner au foyer de l'âme, où il y a eu une rencontre.
Charles Wagner was a Lutheran pastor involved in the movement to unite all of the Reformed Protestant churches. At his church, Abdu'l-Baha spoke on the vital force of love and on the importance of Christ, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah, and the idea of progressive revelation, that all of the messengers of God have the same common goal, though they have appeared at different times in history.
The manifestations of God have all sought to lead men into the paths of virtue. Yet we, their servants, still dispute among ourselves. We have shut our eyes to the underlying principle of all religions, that God is one. This loving God desires peace for all his creatures. Why then do they spend their time in war? It is the outward practices of religion that are so different. And it is they that cause disputes and enmity, while the reality is always the same and one. Truth has no division. The day is coming when all the religions of the world will unite, for in principle, they are one already.
To the Theosophists, Abdu'l-Baha expressed joy in meeting such Parisians, praising them for their intelligence, charitable work, and lack of prejudice. Charles Bleck was President and Secretary General of the Société Théosophique de France. After he met Abdu'l-Baha, he concluded,
Abdu'l-Baha is the perfect embodiment of universal love, the real and ideal prophet of brotherhood and peace, a perfect divine example for all of us to follow. And we all love and revere him because he is at one and the same moment so divine and so humain.
For the first time in his ministry, Abdu'l-Baha outlined the principles of Baha'u'llah, emphasizing unity.
The independent search after truth, the oneness of the human race, unity of all religions, the condemnation of prejudice, the harmony between religion and science, the equality of men and women, compulsory education, the adoption of a universal auxiliary language, the abolition of extremes of wealth and poverty, a world tribunal, the exaltation of work to the rank of worship, justice and universal peace. These stand out as the essential elements which he proclaimed in the course of these journeys.
Et l'influence qu'elle a laissée en France, c'est ici que Abdu'l-Baha, pour la première fois, il a développé les principes sociaux de la révélation de Baha'u'llah. Ici, en plein cœur de Paris, il a parlé de la civilisation spirituelle qui doit aller de pair avec la civilisation matérielle pour éviter qu'il y ait la guerre.
Religion should unite all hearts and cause wars and disputes to vanish, and bring life and light to each heart. Let us see the light wherever it shines, and may we be enabled to recognize the light of truth, no matter where it may arise.
In many talks, he emphasized the importance of the harmony of science and religion.
God made religion and science to be the measure of our understanding. When religion shows its conformity with science, then will there be a great unifying cleansing force in the world, which will sweep before it all wars, disagreements, discords, and struggles.
Deploring all forms of prejudice, Abdu'l-Baha was especially emphatic concerning the need for racial unity.
Concerning the prejudice of race, it is an illusion, a superstition pure and simple. For God created us all of one race. In the sight of God, there is no difference between the various races. Why should man invent such a prejudice?
His message was love and unity. That was the key message for everybody, to love and be forbearing to everybody else. Probably the most strident messages he gave was about loving your neighbor, loving the stranger, loving the immigrant, regardless of who he is or who you might think he is. And even if your thoughts about him are correct, you should still love him.
Abdu'l-Baha loved the friends in Paris. He taught them how to transform their lives, their thoughts and actions, all for the benefit of the human race. In October of 1911, Abdu'l-Baha said, "If you desire with all your heart friendship with every race on earth, your thought, spiritual and positive, will spread. It will become the desire of others, growing stronger and stronger until it reaches the minds of all men."
Abdu'l-Baha also addressed gender inequality.
In the world of humanity, the female sex is treated as though inferior. This condition is due not to nature, but to education. If women receive the same educational advantages as those of men, the result would demonstrate the equality of capacity of both, since neither is superior to the other. Ere long the day shall come when the men addressing the women shall say, "Blessed are ye, verily ye are worthy of every gift, because in sciences and arts you shall become equal to men, and as regards tenderness of heart and the abundance of mercy and sympathy, you are superior."
These ideas were revolutionary at that time, particularly as he emphasized the role of women in world peace.
So it will come to pass that when women participate fully and equally in the affairs of the world, war will cease. For woman will be the obstacle and hindrance to it.
His purpose was to spread the teachings of his father, Baha'u'llah, and to assist as much as he could in bringing world peace.
Do not think the peace of the world an ideal impossible to attain. When a thought of war comes, oppose it by a stronger thought of peace. A thought of hatred must be destroyed by a more powerful thought of love.
Peace was very important to Abdu'l-Baha. He considered war a total aberration of society, to the point where of all of the evils which he saw in the world and knew about, it is only the armament makers that he named by name for spreading their toxic goods. In Paris, he seemed to be very active in contacting diplomats, politicians, and government officials. It does seem that at times Abdu'l-Baha was on his own private peace mission with this sort of what might one call now shuttle diplomacy, going from one embassy to another embassy.
In France, Abdu'l-Baha met a number of well-known people. Professor Edward G. Brown of the University of Cambridge and his wife met Abdu'l-Baha in Paris and London. Previously, Brown had met Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha in Palestine, describing each of them in word portraits. Of Abdu'l-Baha, he said,
"One more eloquent of speech, more ready of argument, more apt of illustration, more intimately acquainted with the sacred books of the Jews, the Christians, and the Mohammedans, could, I should think, scarcely be found. About the greatness of this man and his power, no one who had seen him could entertain a doubt."
Abdu'l-Baha met and gave a lecture to professors and theological students at Pasteur Henri Monner's Theological Seminary. He also visited Albert Kahn, a French banker and photograph collector, at his private museum and garden. Another noted visitor in both London and Paris was American poet Ezra Pound, who wrote to a friend that Abdu'l-Baha was
more important than Cézanne, and not the least like what you'd expect of an Oriental religious now. At least I went to conduct an inquisition, and came away feeling that questions would have been an impertinence. The whole point is that they have done instead of talking, and a Persian movement for religious unity that claims the feminine soul equal to the male is worthwhile.
experimental dancer Raymond Duncan, brother of the renowned Isadora, and composer Dane Rudyard were also in the Baha'i circle. Rudyard deemed the Baha'i message to have embodied clearly the most basic keynotes of the collective spirit of the age. Henri Bergson was a renowned French philosopher who visited Abdu'l-Baha in Paris in 1913. Bergson, accompanied by some professors belonging to his school of thought, came to the residence of Abdu'l-Baha. Waliullah Varka remembered,
"After having exchanged greetings and taken tea, Abdu'l-Baha declared that there exists a unity of vision between materialists and people who believe in God on a single matter. The creation of all that exists is due to a very great force that eludes description. The difference between the beliefs of these two groups resides in the fact that materialists have called this enormous force nature, while believers in God have called this great force God." Then Bergson humbly said,
"If you can reconcile materialists and believers in God, we will be very grateful to you."
Abdu'l-Baha said, "If someone goes to the seaside, takes some seawater in the palm of his hand, raises it to his mouth, and tastes it, his taste buds will note that it is salty. Can he then claim that there is no salt in the sea?" Bergson thought for a moment and then answered,
"No."
Then Abdu'l-Baha said, "Man contains a force we call consciousness and intelligence. It is thanks to this force that man is able to create all of these extraordinary inventions and discover the forces existing in nature. Can one then claim that the original being or creative force that created man is deprived of this same force?" Bergson fell into deep reflection and suddenly, breaking the silence of the meeting, banged on the table violently with his fist, rattling all of the empty teacups. He then said,
"No one has so far been able to resolve such a complex problem
with such simple words.
And another story about a French writer, French literary critic, whose name was Rémy de Gourmont. Laura Barney's sister, Natalie, befriended him and dragged him out to a meeting with Abdu'l-Baha. Rémy de Gourmont writes about this meeting, and in the article, he starts the article by saying that Rémy de Gourmont has found a new religion. And then he describes the meeting with Abdu'l-Baha.
The eloquent patriarch spoke to us of the great truth that dominates all passing truths, and quarrels disappear in the shadow of the great peace. The prophet is joyful, upon whom 40 years of prison have left no trace. He had with him a bouquet of violets, offering one to each of his visitors.
The reclusive author published his article in La France and later in the journal Mercure de France. Hassan Taqizadeh, a founder member of the Persia Committee in London, also met Abdu'l-Baha in Paris.
Abdu'l-Baha was extremely polite and wise and possessed excellent manners. Every time that he went outside and walked in streets or parks, he attracted people's attention.
A Japanese ambassador to Madrid, Viscount Arakawa, and his wife, visiting Paris, were anxious to meet Abdu'l-Baha. As his wife suffered from a bad cold, and they were due to leave the next day, Abdu'l-Baha came after a long, tiring day to meet them at the Hotel Diana. Lady Blomfield was present.
Though the hour was late, through the cold and rain he came, with his smiling courtesy bringing joy to us all. Abdu'l-Baha talked of conditions in Japan, of the great international importance of that country, of service to mankind, of the work for the abolition of war, of the need for improving conditions for the worker, and of the necessity of educating girls and boys equally.
He also spoke about religion and science.
He said, scientific disguise have increased material civilization. There is in existence a stupendous force, as yet, happily, undiscovered by man. Let us supplicate God that this force may not be discovered by science until spiritual civilization shall dominate the human mind. In the hands of men of lower material nature, this power would be able to destroy the whole earth. Well, the friends, wondering, said, how is it possible that having spent all his life imprisoned in an eastern fortress, he should so well understand the world's problems and possess the wisdom to solve them so simply?
Religion is concerned with things of the spirit, politics with things of the world.
He also said, the religious ideal is the soul of all plans for the good of mankind. Religion must never be used as a tool by party politicians. God's politics are mighty. Man's politics are feeble.
When Abdu'l-Baha observed the workings of politics in the West, he contrasted what he saw with the pattern of divine civilization.
In France, I was present at a session of the Senate, but the experience was not impressive. Altercation and useless quibbling were frequent. The result mostly confusion and turmoil. Even in one instant, a physical encounter took place between two members. It was not consultation, but comedy.
By contrast, he set forth what he meant by consultation.
Consultation must have for its object the investigation of truth. He who expresses an opinion should not voice it as right, but set it forth as a contribution to the consensus. For the light of reality becomes apparent when opinions coincide.
Another theme Abdu'l-Baha addressed was the importance of the arts. One evening, at the home of Monsieur and Madame Dreyfus Barney, Abdu'l-Baha said to an artist that all true art is a gift of the Holy Spirit. When the artist expressed the fear that he might not have the understanding to grasp this, Abdu'l-Baha reassured him that he would pray for him. And as he spoke, the troubled look of the artist was replaced by relief, understanding, and joy.
Our actions will help the world, will spread civilization, will help the progress of science, and cause the arts to develop. Without action, nothing in the material world can be accomplished.
Throughout his visits, the artists in the Paris community continued their activities. The American painter Edwin Scott and his wife Josephine lived near Horace and Bertha Hawley on a street famous for artists, writers, and other creative thinkers. Weekly gatherings with Abdu'l-Baha were held at Scott's residence and studio, sometimes as many as 200 attending. Around the corner, on Boulevard Raspail, was the Hawleys' gallery, which he also visited. Natalie Barney, Laura's sister, lived an unconventional life, holding artistic salons for artists, poets, and authors, some of whom met Abdu'l-Baha. A number of the writers of her circle made public mention of Abdu'l-Baha or the Baha'i faith. When Abdu'l-Baha was in Paris, Natalie hosted him for dinner at her apartment near l'École des Beaux-Arts. On two occasions, Abdu'l-Baha met the renowned Indian musician and Sufi leader, Inayat Khan, who was visiting France for the first time. Khan performed music for Abdu'l-Baha, including songs of Persian poetry.
Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah.
The master praised his work, saying it had been 60 years since he had heard songs of his homeland played with such quality, and talked with him about the history of music. The next day, Abdu'l-Baha spoke to those gathered about music as a metaphor for the different religious and intellectual ideals in the world. Abdu'l-Baha was photographed by two professional photographers in Paris. In both 1911 and 1913, he visited the studio of French photographer André Taponnier, whose clients included members of the leading royal families of Europe.
D'un événement, quand Abdu'l-Baha était à Paris en 1900, il a été reçu donc par Valentin Vaucan, qui était un photographe belge.
Vaucan had a patent related to his use of color photography using the latest technology. The historic photo he took of Abdu'l-Baha was published in Histoire mondiale de la photographie en couleur. Other sites he visited included Théâtre du Châtelet, the Louvre, and Tuileries Gardens. Versailles, Notre Dame, and various hotels, churches, and other buildings where he gave talks. Contrasting Versailles with a children's home Abdu'l-Baha visited, he deplored the difference between the many magnificent buildings kept solely for entertainment, while the poor were abandoned to such misery and wretchedness. He also went to Bois de Boulogne, visiting the man-made waterfall called La Cascade. There he meditated, submerged in a sea of thought.
Meditation is the key for opening the doors of mysteries. This faculty brings forth from the invisible plane the sciences and arts. Through the meditative faculty, inventions are made possible. Colossal undertakings are carried out. Through this faculty, man enters into the very kingdom of God.
After the visit to the waterfall, they had tea at the Pavillon Cascade, today known as La Grande Cascade, one of Paris' top restaurants. This is a remarkable glass and steel Belle Époque structure from the 1890 Paris exhibition. During Abdu'l-Baha's second stay in Paris, his older daughter, Ruha, came there to have treatment for a throat ailment. Edith Sanderson hosted Ruha and her husband, Mirza Jalal, and Abdu'l-Baha visited them frequently. During this second sojourn in Paris, he stayed at 3 different hotels. The first was an apartment which Hippolyte Dreyfus had rented for him. Today, this elegant building is called Le Dockham's Hotel, located at 117 Rue Lauriston.
Ensuite, il va changer d'hôtel, où il va décider d'aller à l'hôtel Baltimore, donc 88 avenue Kléber. Et ensuite, parce qu'il considérera que c'est trop bruyant, il choisira l'hôtel Pension Martha, 97 rue Lauriston.
There's a short but striking story of a poor black man who comes to a hotel looking for Abdu'l-Baha and is turned away. The master rebukes the responsible hotel man, saying, "I did not come to see expensive hotels or furnishings, but to meet my friends. I did not come to Paris to conform to the customs of Paris, but to establish the standard of Baha'u'llah." So impressive, so fearless, so clear. Abdu'l-Baha also said, "Let not conventionality cause you to seem cold and unsympathetic when you meet strange people from other countries."
The diversity in the human family should be the cause of love and harmony, as it is in music, where many different notes blend together in the making of a perfect chord. If you meet those of different races and color from yourself, do not mistrust them, but rather be glad and show them kindness. Think of them as different colored roses, growing in the beautiful garden of humanity, and rejoice to be among them.
There are varied reports in how others saw Abdu'l-Baha.
Once we saw a cab driver
take off his cap, hold it in his hands, and gazing, amazed, with an air of reverence, whilst the majestic figure of Abdu'l-Baha, courteously acknowledging his salutation, passed by with that walk which a friend had described as that of a king or of a shepherd.
The French people would gaze at him in awe. And one day I saw a young man with more than ordinary perception cross himself instinctively. He had recognized one of the great ones of God.
The Universal House of Justice has written, "The accounts of Abdu'l-Baha's travels and of the effect he had on those who met him are legion. Some went to extraordinary lengths to enter his presence, going by boat, by foot, or even under railway trains, and by the urgency of their desire to see him, imprinted themselves on the consciousness of future generations of adults and children. The testimonies of those who were transformed by even a brief, sometimes near wordless encounter with their beloved master remain deeply stirring. In the wide array of visitors he received, rich and poor, black and white, indigenous and immigrant, the universal embrace of his father's faith was unmistakably in evidence."
Abdu'l-Baha's photograph alone had a powerful influence on some. One little girl in America, as the result of a dream she had, insisted that Jesus Christ was in the world. After seeing Abdu'l-Baha's photograph in the window of a magazine store, she instantly identified it as that of the Jesus Christ of her dream, an act which impelled her mother, after reading that Abdu'l-Baha was in Paris, to take the next boat for Europe. They arrived with great anticipation and met him at his apartment. The French press commented favorably on his visits, and stories about his days in Paris and other cities were often published around the world. An article in the Excelsior newspaper reported, "Nothing in our Western civilization seems to surprise him. He integrates himself in our daily life. He is interested in all matters of art and science, in all that brings to our lives spiritual delight, concord, and beauty. The masterpieces of the museum charmed him, and you could have seen him circulating with ease through the Chrysanthemum Exposition." Jean Lefranc, a French journalist who worked for Le Temps, wrote,
"The venerable face of Abdu'l-Baha, in which his young eyes sparkle, beams with intelligence and kindness. He is fatherly, affectionate, simple. He inspires trust and respect. His divine power comes, no doubt, from knowing how to love people and to be loved by them. He merely repeats slowly the great wisdom: love each other."
Though Abdu'l-Baha met many people of prominence, it was the poor who received the greatest attention from him.
His compassion for the aged, for children, and the downtrodden knew no bounds.
He definitely met the poor. One day in 1913, he was walking by the Eiffel Tower and he saw a very shabbily dressed man in a wheelchair selling postcards. And he went up to him, and in French, he said to him, "How is my friend of last year?" And he asked about his house, gave him some money, that he remembered this man from his previous trip.
The poor were always his especially beloved friends. He was never happier than when surrounded by them, the lowly of heart.
One notable couple in Paris, Victor and Fanny Ponsonay, devoted themselves to the education of poor children.
Ce couple de Ponsonay donc va créer la première école Bahá'í en Europe, et donc tous les dimanches, ils s'occuperont des enfants. et ils se privaient de leur repas du midi pour aider ces enfants.
Abdu'l-Baha visited their school in its poor neighborhood, praising and blessing the children and their teachers. Alice Bede, a Baha'i from New York in Paris at the time, remembered,
"We were invited to meet him outside the walls of Paris, where real Baha'i work is carried on by Monsieur Poncenal and his wife, among the very poor children. By going without their noonday meal, which to the French means much, they could give it to these little ones." After 3 months spent going around Paris every day, I assure you I had never seen such a dirty, miserable quarter. At one end was a raised platform and desk of rough boards. And as my eyes caught the greatest name hanging in a frame, and I saw the crowd of dear little ones gathered there, and my ears caught their voices singing, tears filled my eyes. After the song, Monsieur Poncenal read a tablet sent by the master, and then all their heads turned towards the entrance. All arose as Abdu'l-Baha entered and said, "I am very glad to be here with you. I love you very much. I have been in many beautiful houses, but this is more beautiful to me, for the spirit of the love of Baha'u'llah is here. You are all receiving the teachings of God and learning how to act and live, and someday you will be great and wise for having learned the truth." Then, with his head upturned, he chanted a prayer and blessing, and all crowded around him. Near me were some rough boys, but after he came, they never moved nor spoke. Outside the door stood Monsieur Poncenal, and Abdu'l-Baha took out many gold pieces and gave them to him as he bade him goodbye. So ended a never-to-be-forgotten day, having seen Abdu'l-Baha among the children of the poor of the streets of Paris.
Alors, ce qui est remarquable avec l'histoire des Poncenailles, donc il crée la première école Bahá'í en Europe donc, au mois de juillet 1911. Mais quand Abdu'l-Baha vient les voir, Abdu'l-Baha fait des prophéties sur le lieu même. Hein, où il dit, texto, il dit, donc j'ai visité beaucoup d'endroits dans le monde, mais celui m'est plus cher que tout au monde, car l'amour de Baha'u'llah y règne plus que nulle part ailleurs. Voilà. Il dit également à propos des Poncenailles, vous êtes des travailleurs dans le royaume d'Abba. Les rois et les reines ne seront pas célébrés comme vous le serez.
regarding poverty, Abdu'l-Baha offered solutions.
The wrong in the world continues to exist just because people talk only of their ideals and do not strive to put them into practice. If actions took the place of words, the world's misery would very soon be changed into comfort. The arrangements of the circumstances of the people must be such that poverty shall disappear, that everyone, as far as possible, shall share in comfort and well-being. The government of the country should conform to the divine law, which gives equal justice to all. This is the only way in which the deplorable superfluity of great wealth and miserable, demoralizing, degrading poverty can be abolished.
Abdu'l-Baha said love and concern for others must be at the heart of true civilization.
Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Love manifests its reality in deeds, not only in words.
Abdu'l-Baha exemplified love and spoke of it often.
When you love a member of your family or a compatriot, let it be with a ray of the infinite love. Shed the light of a boundless love on every human being whom you meet, whether of your country, your race, your political party, or of any other nation, color, or political opinion.
Abdu'l-Baha's visits coincided with the last years of an age known for its carefree lifestyle, high literary and artistic achievements, and materialism. It would soon collapse into an agony of 4.5 years of carnage and mourning that would further set the stage for a conflict even more terrible a generation later. He spoke to theosophists, Esperantists, church congregations, and others, urging them to unity and peace. Yet he offered words of warning about impending war.
All prejudices, whether of religion, race, politics, or nation, must be renounced. For these prejudices have caused the world's sickness. It is a grave malady which, unless arrested, is capable of causing the destruction of the whole human race. Every ruinous war, with its terrible bloodshed and misery, has been caused by one or other of these prejudices.
Et à mon avis, il a préparé cette communauté à faire face à la guerre qui suivait son départ.
Pour moi, c'est que Abdu'l-Baha s'est adressé à nous, à Paris, au Baha'i, quand il était là. Donc, des fois, il s'adressait au Baha'i du moment, en disant des choses pour le présent, mais des fois, Abdu'l-Baha s'adressait pour le futur.
Quelque part, très souvent, lorsqu'on lit les témoignages, on est surpris par cette chose, qu'Abdu'l-Baha s'adressait au Baha'i du futur, où les choses n'étaient pas encore inexistantes, mais qui allaient le devenir.
Lift up your hearts above the present and look with eyes of faith into the future. Rejoice and be glad that this day has dawned. Try to realize its power, for it is indeed wonderful. God has crowned you with honor, and in your hearts has he set a radiant star. Verily, the light thereof shall brighten the whole world.
Between his visits to France, Abdu'l-Baha returned to Egypt and then traveled in the United States and Canada, England and Scotland, Germany, Hungary, and Austria. Wherever he went, he attracted the attention of the press and inspired those whom he met.
Shoghi Effendi summarized his travels in these words. Indifferent to the sights and curiosities which habitually invite the attention of travelers, careless alike of his comfort and his health, expending every ounce of his energy day after day from dawn till late at night, consistently refusing any gifts or contributions, unfailing in his solicitude for the sick, the sorrowful, and the downtrodden, uncompromising in his championship of the underprivileged races and classes, bountiful in his generosity to the poor, marvelous in his frankness, while demonstrating from platform and pulpit the truth of divine revelation. And last but not least, incomparable in the spontaneity, the genuineness and warmth of his sympathy and loving kindness, shown to friend and stranger alike. He, the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue and the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal, continued for 3 crowded years to trumpet to a world sunk in materialism and already in the shadow of war, the healing, the God-given truths enshrined in his Father's revelation.
Whilst these episodes were taking place, we who witnessed them seemed to be in a higher dimension. The constant awareness of an exhilaration gave us the sense of being one with the life pulse which beats through the universe, an experience to be treasured. It is impossible to find fitting words to express the thoughts and feelings which were with us in those Paris days.
In Paris, he emphasized the need for spiritual transformation, and at times expressed displeasure about materialism and people's indifference to matters of the spirit. American educator Stanwood Cobb recorded that the most important interview he had with the master was in Paris in 1913.
I was on the staff of Porter Sargent's travel school for boys. He inquired about the school and asked me what I taught. I told him that I taught English, Latin, algebra, and geometry. He gazed intently with his luminous eyes and said, "Do you teach the spiritual things?" This question embarrassed me. I did not know how to explain to Abdu'l-Baha that preparing the boys for college entrance exams dominated the curriculum. So I simply answered, "No, there's no time for that." Abdu'l-Baha made no comment, but he did not need to. Out of my own mouth, I had condemned myself and modern materialistic civilization. But Abdu'l-Baha's question and his silent response indicated that from his viewpoint, spiritual things should come first.
Spiritual endeavors, he said, would create social transformation.
This meeting in Paris is a truly spiritual one. I say unto you that he has chosen you to be his messengers of love throughout the world, to be the means of spreading unity and concord on the earth.
Mira Alfassa, known as the Mother, was a French Hindu leader who met Abdu'l-Baha on many occasions in Paris. One day, Abdu'l-Baha asked her to speak in his place because he was not well. She was startled, unprepared, and not a Baha'i. However, after some persuasion, she went and delivered a talk on living the life, and said,
Abdu'l-Baha is not content to give us this teaching. He is living it, and therein lies all his power of persuasion.
Toward the end of his stay, she wrote,
His sincerity and aspiration of the divine was simple and spontaneous. In a few days, he will have left Paris, and I know many hearts will feel a void and will grieve. Yet, only the body is leaving us. His thought will remain faithfully with us. His affection will enfold us, and his spiritual influence will always be the same, whether materially he is near or far.
The spiritual perspective Abdu'l-Baha exemplified remains rare in this world. And for this reason, he will always stand out as a beacon of light to humanity.
Par exemple, j'aimerais lire un extrait d'une de ses lettres adressées donc aux Baha'i à Paris. Il dit, je cite, « Paris a la capacité. Si le feu de l'amour de Dieu touche le cœur de Paris, des âmes bénies se lèveront, et cette ville sera, de tous les lieux, le plus brillant et le plus beau. Que Paris devienne précieuse, que la bannière de la direction suprême y soit hissée, que la ville soit en émoi, que l'étoile du matin de l'unité du monde brille, que l'appel de Dieu s'élève et que le chant du royaume parvienne aux oreilles de ceux qui sont spirituels. C'est cela que j'attends. Combien de temps s'écoulera-t-il avant qu'une âme entre dans l'arène pour obtenir cette distinction? Cela est mon espoir.
In a farewell talk to the friends gathered at 15 Rue Greuze on December 1st, 1913, Abdu'l-Baha affirmed that in spirit they would always be together.
I am leaving Paris, though in reality, I am always with you. Place does not matter. When I arrived in Paris, I likened this beautiful city to a large garden. With loving care and much thought, I examined the soil and found it to be very good and full of possibility. The seed cast into the ground has begun to spring up, and day by day you will see it grow. Paris will become a garden of roses. All kinds of beautiful flowers will spring up and flourish in this garden, and the fame of their fragrance and beauty will be spread in all lands. Verily, the day is dawning when Paris will receive her illumination. Do not allow your minds to dwell on the present, but with eyes of faith look into the future. For in truth, the Spirit of God is working in your midst.
Ma qualification est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma réalité est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma louange est Abdu'l-Baha. Mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma qualification est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma réalité est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma louange est Abdu'l-Baha. Mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma qualification est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma réalité est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma louange est Abdu'l-Baha. Mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha. Ma soumission à la perfection bénie est mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème, diadème, mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème. Ma soumission à la perfection bénie est mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème, diadème, mon glorieux, mon resplendissant diadème. Ma soumission à la perfection bénie est mon glorieux diadème, 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 mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème. Ma soumission à la perfection bénie est mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème, diadème, mon glorieux et resplendissant diadème. L'humanité tout entière, servir l'humanité tout entière. pas de nom, je n'ai pas de titre, je n'ai pas de mention, de qualité. Autre c'est le qu'Abdu'l-Baha, mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha. Je n'ai pas de nom, je n'ai pas de titre, je n'ai pas de mention, de qualité. Autre c'est le qu'Abdu'l-Baha, mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha. Et jamais n'en aurai d'autre, c'est là mon ardent désir, c'est là l'objet de la plus profonde aspiration de mon âme. C'est dans cela qu'est ma vie éternelle, c'est là mon ardent désir, c'est dans cela qu'est ma vie éternelle, c'est dans cela qu'est fait que ma fleur soit grande. Mon nom à moi est Abdu'l-Baha, 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 mon nom à moi
One of the questions I know that many of you are probably wondering. Tim and Ann have spent years of their lives immersed in Abdu'l-Baha. And I'd like to know how you feel that has affected you personally and any of the highlights of finding out more about this journey.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm moved by your response and your coming tonight. I feel that Abdu'l-Baha is a universal figure that anyone could relate to in the world. And we found through our travels and pursuing the stories about him that people were naturally attracted to learning about him and to listening to us. And it's just been a wonderful confirming experience for us. When we started with Luminous Journey, we didn't know all the stories, and we would go from place to place. We didn't even have a final script, but we would go and we would learn in the locations that we went to. And so many amazing things happened to us along the way. People were so hospitable and kind and helpful. And we just learned that the journey is unending. It's an infinite, it's a large journey, and none of us could hold it all in or tell it. You know, there's no film that can tell the whole story. It's an infinite journey that always has relevance because of this station of Abdu'l-Baha. And he's also called the mystery of God. And in that realization that he's so far from us and yet so close to us, it is a great mystery, I think, how he draws souls and he speaks to each one of us. And he could determine, he could look at someone and tell what they needed and give it to that person. He had this great intuitive wisdom and this great love for humanity. And he calls us to do the same, although it's hard to walk in those footsteps, right? So we had many amazing journeys. Well, one of them was just when we decided to go to France. Well, first we were going to see a Klimt exhibit. And then I said to Tim, well, why don't you bring the video camera and we'll look into, the places Abdu'l-Baha visited. And we had wanted to make a European film, but we weren't sure how to do it, time, money, distance, language, all these impediments seemed to exist. But once we made that decision, it was like we had a team in France to help us. And we had people that met us the first day we were there and shared with us and walked with us to these various places that the master had stayed or visited. And suddenly it just started coming together. I mean, that's sort of a miracle in itself when you think of the international nature of this quest that we had. We didn't speak much French. And then we had this, as you saw from the credits, a huge number of people that assisted us in so many ways, including the French language. We went back to Paris and we went to Thonon-les-Bains and to Marseille. And it was just such a joy to imagine the story. I mean, I always wanted a time machine, to literally go back. But it was as if time and space meant for us, in research, and Kathy knows this, I'm sure, as she's researched many historic figures and looked at different examples from history that can still teach us now. It was truly as if we were guided. And many times we would make choices. Well, I remember one in Chicago when we could only, because of finances, choose one location at what was the name of the park? Lincoln Park, right? For Luminous Journey. And so Tim just decided, because we had to pay a fee for each location where we shot, right? And the fee was something like $500 for each location. So we picked one, and we picked the statue of Abraham Lincoln. Well, we filmed there. And then later we found out that Abdu'l-Baha had stopped by that statue and reflected on it. And a few days after that, someone emailed me the photograph of Abdu'l-Baha with that statue. Now, he had just made that decision, I don't know how, but we learned to trust each other's intuition a bit. And of course, working with one spouse is very hard. I don't necessarily recommend it, but somehow we were both so interested in the subject. I think it was the subject itself that kept us on the path, because otherwise we have different ideas, different working methods. I would write a really long script and he would say, oh, cut it by half. And we had to chisel and cut stories out, etc. But, and again, it's not a perfect film, but I hope that for you, it brought some of that presence of Abdu'l-Baha alive, because he's a figure for all of us, each one of us. And we need that light in this world. We need spiritual guidance. We need to see beyond materialism. We need to heal from racism and create equal and just societies. So that for me has been the privilege of trying to follow those footsteps. And there's so much more to learn. We've just shown you a little bit.
Yeah, let's have some questions, but just one little comment. Through stage and music and drama and film, we can start to bring to life, these personalities, the personality of Abdu'l-Baha. But more we get to bring to life the idea of, what he taught and what his father was teaching. I think film is a powerful medium, and it incorporates many of the arts into one unit. So I hope that this will communicate, and I hope that in the future that there'll be more film and video about some of these really important and timely
ideas that have been given to humanity at this particular period. So.
We are actually live streaming this evening. So I'm going to ask anyone with a question to please use the mic. So I'm going to make you first and you second and then Jim. Yeah.
First, I just wanted to thank for the beautiful production that you had. A few years ago, I read an article about from a Persian non-Baha'i scholar that who visited Abdu'l-Baha in Paris. And he mentioned the building was a few story, was a beautiful building. And he had a telephone there that Abdu'l-Baha told this scholar that he never used the telephone. And when you show me the building with the telephone, it was just, the whole article came to my mind. But my question is, how Abdu'l-Baha traveled, how many entourage did he have, especially with the translation and stuff?
Well, he had various members of his entourage, and sometimes they would change out, but a number of Persian men did travel with him. And sometimes he would speak in different languages, like the story of the postcard seller. What else shall we say about that? Kathy, do you have something to add?
Well, his entourage, he had a few people that were with him the whole 3 years, but then there were other people who came and went. No, unfortunately, his dear wife and his dear sister were holding the fort down in Akka, and he was not good at sending them letters. I can tell you, they were not happy about that. But anyway, but Hippolyte Dreyfus and Laura Clifford Barney Dreyfus learned Persian, and so they sometimes served as the translators, particularly in Paris. When he came back in 1913. A young man named Ahmad Sorab, who had spent time in the United States as a youth, and I don't know how much French he knew, but he certainly knew English. And many of the people who were coming were also English speakers. So he was summoned back to Europe and continued to do some translation work for him there. I should tell you about the telephone. You're right. Normally he didn't speak on the phone, but one time he was in that apartment in Paris and the phone rang and none of nobody was there in the apartment but him. So he went and he answered it. And I don't know quite how that went, but I'm sure that was quite an experience for both the person on the other end and Abdu'l-Baha. Pick up the phone. There's Abdu'l-Baha.
So just a little thing about the apartment. We were very fortunate to get permission to film in the apartment that he was in 1911. And it's considered a shrine. It's a place of pilgrimage for the Baha'is. It's considered the third holiest spot in Europe, and you have to get permission to go in. And it's really a lovely experience, knowing that he was there. And there is a cabinet that they opened the cabinet, which has some artifacts from him and his journey, and in there's a little suitcase that he carried on his travels, and very small, and his shoes and different artifacts and things like that. Also in the apartment is the Baha'is own the apartment now. It took a while for them for the apartment to become available because it was leased out over the years. And the woman who was the manager of this building, after Abdu'l-Baha had left, and I'm not sure exactly when, but this is what was relayed to me, that she had the bathtub that was in that apartment moved to her apartment. And it was a nice, big, deep, bathtub. And so she had it years and years and years. And at one point she had to leave, and it was time for her to move on. And she said that the saddest thing that was for her was that she was going to have to leave this bathtub behind, because she didn't know what it was, but every time she took a bath in this bathtub, it was very wonderful. And it was Abdu'l-Baha's bathtub for 9 weeks. And
the Baha'is were able to get the bathtub and move it back into the apartment. So if you ever happen to go there, you'll get to see that bathtub.
But the telephone isn't the original phone that was there, but they have placed one that looks historic. And one thing we were not able to photograph was the room itself where he slept, and then the interior of the cabinet with these precious artifacts, some of which have been given to the Baha'is of France by the Universal House of Justice. So there were certain things we couldn't photograph, but it was a pleasure to be there. And the fact that they bought that apartment in 1996, I believe. And then at Thanan Laban, about 9 different Baha'is own apartments in the building, the Hotel du Parc, where he stayed there. And there are some apartments available in that building. And you might consider that, because how marvelous would that be, that in the future, perhaps that whole building will be Baha'i owned. We don't know, but
People might wonder, why didn't Abdu'l-Baha stay in that same apartment when he came back 2 years later? And the problem was, someone who came to visit him in 1911, a wealthy man from Iran, liked the apartment so much that he was renting it. So it was unavailable for Abdu'l-Baha to use again. But anyway, let me move on to a couple more questions. First Dale, and then you.
I'm not going to ask a question, but I had the privilege of knowing Mrs. Dreyfus Barney. And she was a wonderful woman. My wife and I were guests at her house, and we visited with her, and she was a wonderful woman. I took the last picture of her and I gave it to the National Spiritual Assembly of France and of the United States, and they have it in their archives. Also, I knew Stanwood Cobb. I knew his Horace Holly. I've met both of them. I was a chauffeur for Stanwood Cobb. Whenever he visited Wisconsin, I took him around. So I have had the privilege of knowing him and loving him. He was a very outstanding person. And so was Mrs. Dreyfus Barney. She had a lovely place, and she had a caretaker taking care of her after he died. And I met her, and she was a wonderful person. Believe me, my wife and I both enjoyed our visit with her.
What a special thing.
that's great. And everyone should write stories such as that down and preserve them, you know.
And that does tell us how not that long ago these events occurred, and these people were with us.
Right.
So obviously it has the feeling of a documentary, but it also has a feeling of a devotional, this film. Was that intentional based on your projected audience?
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, we also wanted to infuse this because it's different than Luminous Journey. We didn't do interviews, for example, and we used a lot of art that was created by computer for this, with French motifs and everything. And so we wanted it to be beautiful and spiritually uplifting, as well as informational and educational. So if you're saying we hit the mark, thank you. We'll take that compliment.
It was my job to take the script that she had written and visualize it on the screen. And I can't say that I set out in any particular with any method in mind. A lot of inspiration, I guess, a lot of trial and error, taking the ingredients that we had, the footage we had shot in France, and the historic images, and then trying to create beautiful artistic backgrounds, and just kind of blending them together in a hope that it would be something worthy and something beautiful. Because you know, that period, the Belle Epoque at that time in France, was a time of great beauty. So that was.
I was going to ask if there's going to be a second sequel, or maybe possibly another movie that you're going to make. And it's a great educational purpose in the faith, which is like direct teaching. So I was just curious if you're going to make another movie or a second sequel.
Well, thank you. And you know, the Baha'is of Germany, United Kingdom, you know, England and Scotland, Hungary, Vienna, they all want films too. But in the middle of making this one, Tim turned to me and said, I never want to do a feature film again, you know, at least not with you, you know, I mean, it was like, you know, it's a hard hill to climb, especially at a distance. And, you know, we're just individuals. We didn't have institutional backing. I mean, we had some support certainly, but a sequel, well, that's a wonderful idea. I mean, I would be inspired. Oh, and the film already is in French. We made a French version. That was amazing. And
yeah, we replaced all the English except where the people are on camera. Then we would use subtitles, but we replaced all the narration and all the character voices with French speaking actors, and we replaced all the English text throughout the entire film with French, and that really that was hard. That was really hard.
First of all, congratulations. That was beautiful. And it was very moving for probably, I mean, I'm sure all of us really felt that way. You used a lot of different really awesome mediums with the animations and the acting and the, you know, really large collection of, you know, artifacts that you had, and really bravo. It's a lot of pressure to do what you guys just did. So congratulations. My question is really just, do you have a memory that you've, or how do you think this changed you? You know, like, how do you think making something so moving? I know that in what I do, I'm in architecture, I'm not in film, but I've had the opportunity to design a memorial, and that was a really moving experience for me, and it really changed me and touched me. And I think that this is something that would also qualify as something that would touch you. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
thank you. For me, it's sort of decreased the boundaries. Abdu'l-Baha so yearned for humanity to realize its oneness. And he felt like the boundaries we've divided between countries and races and gender and everything are artificial. He truly wanted us to see differently. And so I think in pursuing this and all the stories, you know, about him, it's humbling and it's also empowering. And it helps us to really see humanity as one people. And that's our job right now, to create a better world and to have hope and to give others hope. So what else? What do you want to say?
Well, how I was changed. I think I'm too close to it as of yet to sort of let it all sink in.
He's tired.
I'm very tired, and we still have a few more tasks at hand regarding a DVD and things like that. I think I was in awe of some of the places that we were able to go, and I like shooting beautiful things, and to go there and to be able to do that. And we weren't planning it, and it just sort of happened, and doors then began to open. And so I think I felt that there was help from beyond in that process. So I think time will tell ultimately where how it's changed me anyway. So.
Like everybody else, congratulations. It talks a lot about art, how much Abdu'l-Baha wanted. And this is a big piece of art, amazing piece of art. I have a couple of technical questions. At the end, it says memory of Ali Muhammad Mazidi. So I wanted to know about that first thing. The second thing, it sounded, I don't know if I am correct or not, but I'd like to know. It sounded to me, as you were doing your researches, the National Assembly of France is doing too. And that's why it sounded to me two parallel researches. One was French version and they come in the picture, and another piece was English. And that's it. Am I right or not? Just technical question.
I'd like to respond. On our first trip in 2018, we had the occasion to go to their National Assembly building, and the archivist who we see on the screen, she was there and very gracious and allowed us to shoot some newspapers from the period, and was then later able to send us materials. We also met with their Office of Public Information person, and we explained what we were here for and what we were wanted to do, make a film, and they were all very encouraging. And we also consulted as to whether or not we should do an English version with subtitles, or do they want a French version? And they wanted a French version because there aren't a lot of materials for the Franco-speaking world out there regarding the Baha'i faith. We received love and encouragement. And what's really interesting is that in the credits that most of the contribution financially and physically was not coming from France. So it was as though we were giving a gift to the nation and to the Baha'i community there. But they were very encouraging. Like, did that answer?
And Muhammad Ali Mazidi was a friend of ours. He died while we were working on the film, but he was always encouraging to us. And he sponsored a Zoom fundraiser, and people contributed to that. That's where we got a lot of the contributions. And then he died suddenly one day, and he was just so eager to see us make this film. And he had encouraged us in other projects too. In fact, he connected me to a young woman, an artist in Tehran, who wants to publish children's books. So she and I have been working together on books. I've never met her, but we're a great team, you know, and she's a great illustrator. And so he made these connections with people, East and West, and just encouraged us. So he actually wanted us to dedicate the film to his brother, but we didn't know his brother. So then he died, and so we dedicated it to him.
Yeah, he passed just almost a day before we were leaving to go back.
Yeah.
And it was such a shock. And he gave us the first money on this project. Yeah, and was our biggest supporter and fan in that recent respect. So we felt it appropriate to commemorate the film to him.
Can I also say that there were several people like Jan Yassian and Frederick Autreur, who are, they were listed as researchers or historians. In most parts of the world, there is usually at least there are one or two Baha'is who are very interested in history and are doing research. And those two fellows are very, very sincerely interested in the history of the Baha'i community in France, and particularly Abdu'l-Baha's time there. And I've been, well, I know one very well. I've been in correspondence with the other. Jan Yassian published in English with the blessing of the National Assembly of France, Abdu'l-Baha in France, which is this thick. It's, you know, Paris Talks is like this thick. His book is this thick. It includes all of the talks, or most of the talks from 1913. Paris Talks is only 1911. You can buy it through Kalamat Press. It's not through the distribution service. You have to go directly online to Kalamat and get it that way. But it's extremely interesting. So it is in English. Yes, yes, yes. He's Canadian. Jan is Canadian, married to a Baha'i from France. It's the most of the information about 1913 comes from Ahmad Sorab's letters in France to a woman in the United States, where he gave daily accounts of what happened that day. So that's how we have that information. The first 1911 talks, there were people like Lady Blumfeld and her daughters and Mary Hanford Ford and a few other people, mainly Americans or Brits, in the room taking notes. And that's how we got Paris Talks. That happened a lot less in 1913.
Just one last little thing. My observation was Well, we didn't know the story at all when we went there, and I had a different feeling about his time in Europe. You know, World War I was about to happen. He knew it. He went there, as Jan says in the film, doing diplomatic visits to consulates and and oftentimes his entourage would not go in. The doors would be closed. So we don't have records of what he did, but it had a different vibe. The whole experience to me of what he was doing in Europe was very different. And if you notice, the countries that he did visit that were all involved in World War I. When he came to the United States and when we did Luminous Journey, it just had a different feeling to me, a different energy. He was talking about the vision of, you know, the spiritual destiny of this country and the people. It was just just a different energy. I don't know.
Well, he also focused on race unity in America, and he predicted that unless we solved that issue, blood would run in the streets. And, you know, we're still grappling with that. He so wanted, especially Black and white, to come together in unity. And then in Europe, in London, he talked a lot about poverty and also about peace. And in Paris, he emphasized spirituality because he said the Paris is a city of embellishment, you know, and sometimes he was discouraged about the lack of spirituality in Paris, that, you know, it had reached this apex of materialism and beauty and, you know, all this fashion and everything. But he just wanted that injection of the spirit. Of course, we need it everywhere, don't we?
Thank you so much. We're not going to usher you out of the building immediately, but so people can stick around and talk to you. But I know many people, we've been here for a while. It's 9:30. Again, thank you. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So there may be some food out there still.